Good morning. I'm Nick Pappas, editorial page editor at The Telegraph. I'd like to welcome you to the campus of Nashua High School South. But for the next 60 minutes, the Telegraph editorial board is going to discuss the issues of the day with Ron Paul, the Republican congressman from Texas and a candidate for President of the United States. Congressman, welcome to Nashua. Thank you for joining us. Kevin Landrigan, our senior political reporter, will ask the first question.
Hey, Congressman. You've probably got the most dramatic plans for the federal budget. Could you talk a little bit about who would take over the functions of those 5 agencies you propose to eliminate, such as Commerce, Energy, Interior? And I guess more broadly, how small should the federal budget really become over time if you're president?
Well, the emphasis on this major program of cutting tells me and others that this is a serious problem. The debt is a problem. It's been building for a long time, and that's why it needs serious treatment. But some of the functions aren't taken over. Eventually, Department of Education, I don't believe it was destined to be part of our system. It wasn't authorized. So we want to phase that out. Now, there's a fair amount of money and transitional programs from some of these departments, like in energy, if it has to deal with nuclear waste and things like that. There's funds for this, and some of the educational programs actually have funds for transitioning. But the real goal is to change the nature of our government and be more constitutional and not accept the notion that government should forever grow and live off borrowed money and taxes and inflation, because it's not working and it's coming apart and just tinkering around the edges. I don't believe anybody's offered any cuts, real cuts, whether it's in Washington or the other candidates, because they're talking about cuts 5 and 10 years out of only those proposed increases. So they're not intending to change the nature of the government. I want to change the responsibility of the government and conform with the Constitution. That is, if you don't have authority, you shouldn't be doing it. And we just can't do this. We can't keep burdening the dollar with these debts. And I don't think anybody else is serious about this. So some of the programs would be transitioned out. Most of the unemployed, that is, those people who will become unemployed, will be through attrition. It's not like you lay off 200,000 or 300,000 people immediately, and it would be more through attrition. And I think that we only have 2 choices in this country: whether we continue to do what we doing now and have a catastrophic economic crisis where the dollar fails and we will have to come home from every place overseas and our entitlement system collapses, or we work our way out of it. Right now, I don't see anybody else offering a way to work out of it. I think the problem is serious enough that we do have to contemplating these cuts.
Are student loans one of those programs that would be transitioned under your plan?
Yes, they don't get abolished in one day, obviously, but I think it's a failed program. I don't think we should have had it to begin with. And if you look on the positive side, that's sort of looking at the positive side of the housing bubble. People had houses and it was wonderful, and the prices were going up and they kept borrowing, but eventually, it collapsed. It was too much, and now the people it was supposed to help have lost it. Same way in education. It was intended to help people get an education. But when you create a lot of new money and credit, and then you allocate it by rules and laws and send it into medicine or education, you don't get higher quality, you get higher prices. So in education, nobody argues with me that the cost of education has skyrocketed, much more so than those things that are delivered by the market. Computers and TVs and cell phones, those prices go down and quality goes up. But education was supposed to give everybody an education that wanted it. A lot of people got a college degree. Quality of education is down. And now they're indentured servants. I mean, they owe $1 trillion. And what are you going to do? Bail them all out? Perpetuate the whole problem? Print more money? It doesn't solve the problem. So that's why you have to change it structurally. It was never intended in our Constitution that the federal government would be responsible and have this obligation that anybody who wanted a college education to get it. And this is just recent history. I mean, when I went through college and medical school, that wasn't assumed to be the case. I mean, the costs were lower and people were expected to work and do their best and take longer to get through. But it wasn't meant to be just borrow and borrow and borrow. And some of these students come out with $100,000 in debt. It's unsustainable, and you can't patch it together. You have to have a new system.
Congressman, the public perception of the favorability rating of Congress these days is about as low as it's ever been.
Right.
How does someone that's part of Congress overcome that to become president?
Well, because I think when people think about what I've been doing and my arguments from the day I started in the 70s through all the votes, I mean, if you the thing that most people know me by is the fact I probably voted by myself more so than everybody else put together, because I was objecting to this. People know I've objected to spending, the debt, the foreign policy, the monetary policy. So the question is whether I will be lumped together with the rest. I suspect that I will not be lumped together with the politicians who went along to get along and play the partisan games. And all they're concerned about in Washington is power. They're not concerned about really changing anything. Policies don't change from one party to the next. Rhetoric's different. Policies don't change. I don't think I've been put in that category that I haven't offered a change in the policy and defining it clearly, talking about the Federal Reserve and the errors made in our foreign policy and the entitlement system and what we just talked about on education, student loans. I don't think I'm identified with the problems.
But what, following up on that question, what one thing could the next president do to improve the culture on Capitol Hill? In other words, inspire more bipartisanship, more compromise, less gotcha by one party to the other party?
The president should use the benefits he gets from an election. So if I'm elected, that means the country wants to go in that direction. There'll be new members of Congress, but there'll be some that will have to get pressured into going that way. I see it not so much as the necessity for compromise. I think compromise gave us our problems, because conservatives and liberals like to spend for different reasons, so they compromise and they keep spending. I think you have to work with coalitions, which is working with the other side, and I've done pretty well on that, especially on the monetary issue, which is a nonpartisan issue, civil liberties and war issues. I work very well with those from the other side of the political spectrum because they want less of that, and I work very well, of course, with conservative free market people. So it's putting these coalitions together that I think is important, and fortunately for me, defining and understanding the principles of liberty, actually it's a very appealing argument. People like to be free and left alone, and they also, especially the young people, are very much attuned to taking a principled stand and following the rule of law and following the Constitution, rather than just saying, "Oh, Congress can do anything they want," and look at the mess that they've gotten us into. So I think there's a lot of practical ways of working with different factions and finding people who agree with you, rather than making a partisan fight, because when it's power, the issues are less important. It's just a power struggle and demagoguing and try a gotcha type of things and trying to embarrass the other side. So my approach would be completely different.
Congressman, you've been in Congress obviously a long time, so you've seen a lot of change in the culture of Congress. Could you maybe just compare and contrast? I mean, when did things start changing to the point to where not only wasn't there much compromise, but it sounds like what you're suggesting is there isn't a lot of coalition building as well, and what are some of the reasons for that?
Well, I've written about this and talked about it for many years, and talked about the time would come when it would be a struggle over the different factions fighting over a shrinking pie. And so when it became evident, and this has been gradual, probably 10 years or so, it's been known that we're in trouble, but certainly in 2008, all of a sudden with this crisis, people realize, wow, the debt is out of control, and how are we going to get our benefits, and how are we going to run our programs? So this is what it's all about now, is who can grab the remaining part of a shrinking pie. And I think we spend more time on trying to work favoritism in government and get what is becoming less available to us, rather than saying, how does a country become productive? How were we used to be productive? And right now, we're not productive, and all we have is debt. So there's a big difference between concentrating on getting us working again and getting us jobs, and not spending and not being the debtor nation of the world, the biggest in the history of the world. And it has to do with the monetary system, the tax system, the chasing away of capital, a foreign policy that is deeply flawed. So unless people understand that, we're not going to get back on our feet again. But the clash that first occurred in the Congress, this impasse, now it's in the streets. And I'd like to think that they're all complaining about the same thing, but they're not. In Greece, I thought it was interesting how they described the two factions. It's not exactly the way it is here, but it gives you a hint. I heard the announcement the other day that the two factions in Greece were the communists and the anarchists, whatever all that means. But here, they're in the streets, and I think it's a healthy attitude to complain about what has happened, economically, because, for instance, I believe strongly that the monetary system, when you destroy a currency, you destroy the middle class. And that's what they're worried about. The middle class is being destroyed. Well, who benefits? The very wealthy. But I'm not against the wealthy if they earned it and not benefited by the structural problems that we have. But no, this is all predictable. It would come, and the results of this are up for grabs, because we will have to make a choice this year or next, or somewhere down the road. We will have to make a major choice in our country on whether we want to defend liberty, believing liberty produces wealth, or we go for more totalitarianism. And as society breaks down, which is inevitable when you don't have a monetary system and a market to work, it breaks down, and then the people do get frightened. People are willing to give up their liberties. We gave up because of the frightening example of what 9/11 did to us. We gave up a lot of civil liberties because of this. Oh, the Patriot Act, and give up our privacy, and unwarranted searches. So this could happen. It could get much worse. So this is why it's so crucial that people understand how we got into this, and whether or not we want more freedom or less freedom. And obviously, I'm on the side of more freedom.
What do you think is going to happen, or should happen, with this super committee in Congress? Is this going to lead to anything, or just more infighting?
I'm not very optimistic about it because they're not dealing with the problem. They're dealing with tinkering with budgets. They're dealing with cutting the proposed increases. And one side will not touch taxes, which I don't want to touch. I don't want to raise taxes. But the other side said we can't cut a nickel out of this military operation, which gets us only into trouble and contributes to our debt and a great burden on our society. And this is endless. Right now, this is perpetual. First it's Libya, next it's Syria, on to Iran, and we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Pakistan is a hotbed. Just opened up bases in Ethiopia. We can't do that. And one side won't even consider that we can't afford that any longer. So unless we do, our problems are going to get much worse.
Well, it seems that the president has tried to change the focus of American foreign policy and how he handled Libya. How would you rate his performance in the revolution in Libya and what's now being called the Obama Doctrine?
Yeah, I think it's dangerous, very, very dangerous, because it's perceived as a success, a pseudo-success. We won't know about that place for a long time to come. Right now, it's most likely the Islamists will take over. This is generally what's been happening. Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, the Islamists are taking over, which jeopardizes what is conceived or perceived as our special interests, and that is our national interests as well as Israel. But it's changing dramatically. But because it's perceived as a danger, it's only going to encourage them to do more. And it was a complete flaunting of the process. But this has been going on for years. We haven't had a declared war since World War II. So this means that now you don't even have to consult with Congress. You just go and do it and get your marching orders from NATO, get your marching orders from UN. It's a grand victory for world government. I don't think the American people are ready for that. I don't want world government. I have enough trouble dealing with the federal government. I want less federal government, so I don't want world government. So, but this is a victory for world government, and it's going to be no more successful than the Iraq War, and that was a disaster.
At the chamber breakfast earlier today, you drew a distinction between the military budget and the defense budget. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
See, we have a huge military budget. When you add it all up, I think the DOD is like $787 billion. It's a lot, and I want to get that down to at least 500. But the total military budget and the foreign policy budget is well over $1 trillion. It's probably 1.2 trillion. It's huge. But you'd have to add up all the foreign aid and the State Department and the CIA and all these things that so often are off budget. And there's probably some that comes out of the Federal Reserve that we don't even know about. But it's huge. So that has nothing to do with our defense. I want to defend the country. That's our obligation. That's what's in the Constitution. And we neglect defending our Constitution. We get involved in things that jeopardizes our security because we become more vulnerable because our interventions overseas is seen as invasion and occupation, and when people die from the consequence of what we do, there's reason to expect people to be pretty unhappy with it. And they're very unhappy with us. And they can't understand why we're over there lobbing bombs on people around the world. And, we're after some bad guys. But sometimes we miss, and sometimes we kill innocent people. That militarism, where you spend military money for the sake of spending money. Just the other day, there was they were talking about not building a particular aircraft. We can't quit. There's jobs in my district for that. Well, this is exactly the Keynesian attitude that conservatives generally condemn, because that's supposed to be a liberal attitude where the government has to generate jobs at home and spend money. Well, conservative Keynesians said, you've got to build bombs and weapons. So they figure if you're building drone missiles, it's good for jobs, but it doesn't enhance our standard of living. We go and we make more enemies, we drop bombs, we destroy infrastructure around the world, then we have to rebuild the infrastructure. And that's all counted in the GDP. It has nothing to do with prosperity here. This is why there is a disconnect with some of the statistics and how unhappy the people really are.
What messages should Washington take from the Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street efforts that are going on right now?
That the people are catching on. They're sick and tired of the two-party system because they know there's no significant difference. Conservatives elect Republicans to cut back because they say the conservatives, they want limited government and balanced budget, and they don't do it. And Democrats get elected because they're supposed to protect our privacy and our civil liberties and have less war. And they actually promote war every bit as much, if not more, as the Republican. The people are sick and tired of that. And then neither party looks at monetary policy, and there is now a large majority now in this country who say, at least find out what the Fed's doing. They know that $5 trillion was spent bailing out foreign central banks and foreign governments during the financial crisis, and we have to fight for little bits and pieces of information. People know that, and they know that at the leadership levels in Washington, Republican, Democrat, they don't really care about that. The Tea Party people, as well as the occupation of Wall Street and other places, they know there's a big problem. They don't agree exactly what the problem is. They don't agree exactly with the solution. But because they are annoyed with the ineffectiveness and the bankruptcy of this country, they are speaking out because they know the conventional politics has not worked.
Regarding tax reform, do you like a fair tax, a flat tax? You've talked about a constitutional amendment on taxes. In the short term, how should we change the tax code to encourage more job growth?
Well, the only amendment that I haven't proposed, unless I'm forgetful, I haven't proposed an amendment to the Constitution on taxes other than repealing the 16th Amendment.
Right.
I want to get rid of the income tax. I think the income tax is the worst because it's based on the assumption that all money that you earn belongs to the government and you get to keep a certain percentage at the permission of the government. So every time they move your tax code up or down, if they move your tax liability down, that's a cost to government. And conservatives and liberals talk in that language. That shouldn't be the case. I want to lower your taxes, but I just want to give you your money back. So that's quite a bit different. Now, my program for taxes is the lowest tax possible, but I concentrate on spending because I call spending a tax, because spending taxes the economy. Spending takes, they tax and they take money. The government takes money out of the economy. Then they borrow, that takes money out of the economy. Then they inflate, and that destroys the value of the money that remains in the economy. So everything you do to pay for expenditures is a tax. So I want to get expenditures down and then deal with the tax code. That's why I've spent more time talking about spending cuts than I have about a fair tax, for instance. But there's shortcomings in all those proposals. My promise to my district has always been I will always vote for lower taxes, and I will always vote to lessen the power of the IRS, which means the ultimate thing, we get rid of the income tax. But the fair tax is not all that fair to everybody. It's regressive. The poorer people pay a higher percentage of their income, and the people in retirement, they've already paid taxes on that. That's not fair to them. Then you also have the flat tax has shortcomings because when they propose them, whether it's 9% or 20%, whatever they claim, it's not near enough to pay the bills. So you have to, if you want to keep government the size as it is, you're going to have a flat tax of 40%, and you're going to have a sales tax of 38% or something, but nobody wants to talk about that, and that would not help the economy. So I don't see any proposals out there other than cutting spending and then reducing all taxes the best you can. I mean, capital gains and inheritance tax, whatever you can get, just cut taxes and let the people spend their money.
But do you perceive, and you have been doing this for a while, do you perceive any more support among the American people for these flat tax concepts, or are they more worried about cutting spending and they see the flat tax as just a bumper sticker?
Well, they're disillusioned because they've heard it, but they want changes. They're sick and tired of the tax code. So, the people who like the flat tax get rid of all the paperwork, and that's appealing to all. I mean, that's why probably if taxes didn't go up and we got rid of the 16th Amendment and we had a fair tax, it would be better. So I would support that. But the flat tax is the same way, but we have to talk about the spending side of the equation.
One of your more controversial proposals is the elimination of the Federal Reserve. Could you explain a little bit why that you believe that's necessary, and what could be done to, let's say, monitor the monetary markets in replace of that?
So you said my innovation. What was that one?
One of the more controversial positions that you have is the elimination of the Federal Reserve.
Elimination. Yes, and but right now it's 60-70% of the American people say we should know what the Fed's doing. I mean, that's out there now. First time in the history of the Federal Reserve. It's just happened in the last 3 or 4 years because of all the information we have been able to get out and find out how much mischief is involved and why some people get bailed out and others are allowed to fail. Worrying about who's going to regulate the banks and all. Well, the market is supposed to regulate them, not regulators. Regulators are, and when Congress passes laws, they respond to the lobbyists, and lobbyists are the people who are getting regulated, and that's why it never worked. Regulations, from the SEC on down, hasn't saved us from all these problems. And every time we have a problem, we add another layer of regulations. SEC delayed the recovery in the Depression because nobody could understand it. And then when Enron failed, the Republicans gave us Sarbanes-Oxley, and that kept weakening the economy. And now we had Dodd-Frank, and nobody can figure that out. And it's this burden on top of these medical regulations coming down. But people sort of suppose that if you don't have regulators and the Federal Reserve, the markets wouldn't be regulated, but they'd be regulated much more strictly. It would be that if a bank got into trouble and they were bankrupt, they wouldn't have this lender of last resort saying, take all the risks you want. If you make your money, you get to keep it. But if you mess up, we're going to bail you out. And so, and that hasn't changed. But then what happens is the government comes in because it failed. They say, what we want to do is manage your business. Today, the Fed is more involved than ever, and they're deciding what the salaries will be and what the payouts will be. And that's because we bailed them out. In a free market, if they mess up, they go out of business rather than the taxpayer bailing them out. And we don't have that. We have this reassurance. That's what government insurance does. You know, the FDIC, everybody's, whoa, it's wonderful. And we couldn't have it where the government didn't guarantee everything. But that guarantees that they'll make mistakes, and that'll guarantee a bubble. And then it guarantees that they'll have to print a lot of money to try to contain the collapsing bubble. And that's where we are today.
So where would we be today if the Bush administration and the Obama administration hadn't bailed out the financial system, hadn't bailed out General Motors?
If we'd have done the whole thing by keeping hands off, we'd have been like in 1922 after the huge crash of 1921. It takes about a year. You need to liquidate it, get out of the way, get the prices down, don't prop up anything, and people will go back to work again. Growth occurs again. But the debt burden has to be eliminated. The debt burden was on the banks and the large corporations. So the debt was transferred to the taxpayer. So the corporations got bailed out and look, oh, this Dow Jones is doing fine. They're doing okay. But there are no jobs. There are no jobs. The people they're losing their houses. So the whole thing failed. Same way in the education. You know, we're supposed to give everybody an education. All they got was the debt burden, and now they're indentured servants. So these programs don't work. But politically, they're all popular. Not only when they were putting them in place, oh, that's good, that's good. We want to help everybody, take care of everybody. But now, if I want to make the correction, then I say, oh, you don't care about people. You want to just let this do, there's going to be a depression. There would have been a depression for the people who had been ripping us off and having their profits guaranteed. So it wasn't capitalism, it wasn't free markets, it was a rigged system against the taxpayer, but they throw crumbs to the taxpayer, and finally they come up with really losing on the deal, and that's why people are very unhappy today.
What things can't the marketplace fix then?
What can't they fix?
Mm-hmm.
Well, nobody has a perfect society. I mean, people make errors, so you can't prevent the errors that people make in making their personal decisions. But what you want to do is have the market make all the decisions, but you want to get the government out of the way so they can make proper decisions. For instance, interest rates are rigged. They're all fixed for the benefit of the banks and other people. At the same time, if you're a saver, you get 1%, and you should be getting 6%. So, but as far if you didn't have any of that, and you just had the marketplace, no, you can't prevent mistakes being made, but you contain them. And the people who benefit by taking risk, which is what free market's all about, you take your risks. If you do well, if you interpret the economic environment, you benefit. If you don't, you make a mistake, you face the consequences. You lose out. So no, if you want to have the freest, if you want to have the most thriving, prosperous economic system, it has to be a free market system, and no other system has ever compared to it. And all the intervention in the world, and the planning, and rigging interest rates, and bailing out everybody, and having guarantees, and having government insurance, it all just leads to trouble. And that's what our message is today. We've been doing it in a super way, extravagant way since 1971, because there were no restraints on the lending authorities and the printing of money. And now the consequences here. So if we don't deal with what has happened since 1971 up to now, no way you can solve this problem. It's going to deteriorate. We will bring our troops home, because we'll be like the Soviets. Our system will fail. We won't be able to afford it. Confidence of the dollar will be lost to continue to do this. We can't continue our debt. We owe $3 trillion, and everybody's depending on us, and they still sort of trust us. But as long as they depend on us and we continue to do this, we're bringing rapidly on to us the day of a financial crisis that will be much bigger than what we had in 2008.
What would you say to those GM employees and those students, depending on their federal loans now, that are able to stay in school or have been able to feed and house their kids because they do have the support of the government now?
Yeah. Well, the other day I was giving the same talk before a lot of college students, and only one raised the question, but I benefited this, and I made all the positive points of why it was good, but she says, now I can't get a job. And I explained, just what I've said about how we got into this trouble. I says, the most important thing I can do for you is get you a job, but you have to quit doing what we're doing so that she can get a job and work her way out of this. But even my program, where I want to cut the Department of Education, there are funds in there for transition. The same way with the Federal Reserve. I don't close the Federal Reserve down in one day. I want competition. I want competing currencies. I want transitions. And same way in education and medical care. You can't close down the whole medical system in a day or two, because it's right now it's functioning. So if I want to work my way out, but I want you to have the opportunity to get out of it. You should have the opportunity to get out on education. We should never have laws prohibiting private schooling and homeschooling. On the monetary issues the same way, and education, we ought to always allow people to opt out, but we have to have money for the transition. My argument has been, I do not list attacking spending on Social Security or medical benefits and transitional programs for education. But how are you going to pay for it? Because I even say the program I have is people 25 and under can get out of Social Security if they assume responsibility for that. But you got to cut massively to pay for this, and that's why I have to go after foreign expenditures without damaging national security and these departments that I do not think contribute to the health and benefit of our country.
But as you know, we had this old debt ceiling fight, and if you become president and you talk about a transition, at the same time you're attempting to accomplish all this, I would imagine, and you're trying to cut budgets dramatically.
Right.
I would imagine you're going to run up against this debt ceiling. So how would you as president deal with all that? How do you calm the world markets while trying to get to where the place you want to be?
I think it's very good, because if I want a year or two or three and the debt has to go up and then down, how do you do it? Well, there's $1.7 trillion that we in our national debt owes the Federal Reserve. But who's the Federal Reserve? It's just our creature. We create them. Do they have a rightful ownership to our debt? No. They just printed the money and they gave it to the Treasury, and the Treasury spent the money. I would strike that from the national debt, and I'd have a window of opportunity of $1.7 trillion. And if you cut immediately, you probably wouldn't even use up that whole $1.7 trillion of debt. That would give us the opportunity to do this without raising the national debt. But as you probably inferred, I don't want to raise the national debt limit. Right. But that would give us a chance to do that. The Fed doesn't need to have this obligation of $1.7 trillion that the taxpayer has to keep paying interest to the Federal Reserve. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But the Federal Reserve would have to change their tune. They would have less flexibility, without the holding of all that debt.
As a doctor, what is your solution for the healthcare system?
Get the government out of the way. They've been involved since 1965. Costs have skyrocketed, the quality has gone down, and the patient has lost complete control of the expenditures of their money. There's no incentive to spend less. The system we have today is always charge the maximum. I had a friend that had to go to the hospital the other day because his wife had a problem, and it turned out to be a strained muscle. It cost him $11,000. I mean, if I'd have seen that patient in my office, when I was practicing 10 or 15 years ago, I probably would have charged $30 for an office. I said, it looks like a muscle strain. take some pills, come back and see me in 3 days if you're not doing better. But you go to the emergency room, which this whole system has channeled it, and then the lawyers say, well, if you miss something, you're going to lose your livelihood forever. So they have to order every single test. So everything and everybody's under the gun to try to pay their bills. Say they always charge the maximum. The control is taken away from the patient. And before it was the doctor and the patient relationship. This is why the only transition we can have in this medicine is to give these medical savings account where the patient has control of this money and go back to an insurance program. What we have today has nothing to do with insurance. The so-called government guarantees insurance guarantees that cost of medicine will go up. There's inflation in the cost of medical care. Just as I said before, when the Fed creates the money and then they channel these funds in different areas and they push prices up, whether it's education or housing, in medicine it's the same way. It's the only industry in this country where advancement of technology, computers and all, didn't lower the cost of medical care. We have so much new technology, but it pushes prices up because the government's putting money into there. But in other divisions, actually technology helps other businesses cut down costs. So my program will have a transition. I don't go after child health care or the elderly, but you need to get some market forces back in. You need to stop the inflation. You need to stop the printing of money. You need to trust freedom, and that freedom, prior to 1961, we didn't have people dying in the streets without medical care, but I worked in a Catholic hospital, and nobody got turned away, and there was charity hospitals. There's still a few around, but basically it's exactly the opposite. It used to be the least was charged. People who couldn't afford got their care, but today everybody gets charged the maximum in order to try to maintain these cost of living increases. And the legal system requires us to order every single test. Something has to change there, but it's not the market that destroyed medicine, it was government.
We have a lot of live questions, but I want to follow up with your comments about the importance of the doctor-patient relationship and the importance of freedom. And I wanted to know how that correlates with your position on abortion, which is obviously very pro-life.
Yeah. Well, I think the fetus is a live human being that is entitled to rights. So somebody has to speak for the unborn. The baby that is 1 day old can't make their own decision. It's their body and their life. But who speaks for a 1-day-old child? Somebody has to speak for them. They don't speak for themselves. So the baby that is 1 day before birth, somebody has to speak for them, and it's a live human being. It has legal rights. If you're in a car accident and the woman that is involved and she loses her baby, she has recourse. It's not like it's a petition didn't hurt anybody. She lost a baby. So it's very real. I don't think it's a contradiction. It's more difficult than ever because of the nature of it, but there's not a whole lot of difference about a baby 1 day before birth and 1 day after birth in saying 1 day you can get paid a lot of money for killing the baby, and 1 day afterwards you can go to prison for killing the baby. So we have to resolve this idea about the nature of rights and the nature of life. I don't think the federal government should be involved. All forms of violence all forms are to be taken care of by the states. So whether there's any form of manslaughter, murder, and all these things, all the states thing. I don't like the idea that the federal government comes in and say, like they did with the Supreme Court ruling and saying, well, this is the way it is. They legislated through Roe versus Wade, and they diminished the concept that a life actually existed, and they nationalized it. I don't think it should be nationalized. I think there's some very difficult cases to deal with, and I think it should always be done at the local level. The obvious thing, though, is that the federal government and those who support abortion, if they support taking money from people who are strongly pro-life, taking money from them to permit to do abortions, that stirs up a lot of anger and a lot of emotions. But I cannot come to the conclusion that there's not a living human entity, and that to take that life is an act of violence in order to kill that fetus.
Now, why shouldn't it be nationalized? I'm sorry if I didn't.
Because of our Constitution, because of Article 1, Section 8, and because murder and all acts of violence and criminality and theft is all a state issue. They had no intention on having a national police force enforcing any of these issues. And my solution is just not so much to wait for an amendment or to have a constitutional amendment. My solution is to pass a bill that I have that would remove the jurisdiction from the federal court. You could pass that with a majority vote, and that would just back. It wouldn't be. It doesn't satisfy even a lot of right to life people, because we want to solve the problem at the national level, but that might not come for 20 more years. So I would just say, use the original intent of the Constitution. The issues like this were meant to be taken care of at the state level, and there will be different ways of handling it. But when the Supreme Court makes a mistake, it's for everybody. If a state makes a mistake one way or the other, the way people interpret it, it only involves that state.
John?
I'll attempt to ask a two-part question on behalf of our readers. The first one is, how would you end the war in Afghanistan and Iraq? The second one is, why do you think you've received more contributions from active military than any other candidate?
Very good. I would end it just by coming home as soon as possible. As president, I would be the commander-in-chief. That's one thing that's very clear in the Constitution. War is supposed to be declared by the Congress, not by the UN or NATO or anybody else. Only the Congress has declared it. This is unconstitutional. It was ill-advised. It's bankrupting our country, and it elicits even more enemies from us, and we can no longer afford it. The cost has been way too high. In the last 10 years, the national debt was increased due to our activities overseas by $4 trillion. So the commander-in-chief can bring the troops home, and in a very token way, some more troops are supposedly coming home from Iraq, although we're not out of Iraq. We're going to be there for a long time. But no, I would come home, it would be announced, and it'd come on as soon as possible. Nobody would be immediately dismissed from the military, even though that's what they did after World War II. They'd come home, and they would be based here in this country, and all those salaries would be spent here. It would give at least a temporary stimulus to our economy, rather than continue to stimulate the economies of Germany and Japan and South Korea and all over the world. As far as the military supporting me, a lot of people, it's the conventional wisdom in Washington to say that, well, I wasn't for this war, but the troops are involved, and if you don't vote for the money, you're jeopardizing the troops, you don't support the troops, you're un-American, you're unpatriotic, so even if the president was wrong, we got to keep funding it. I don't buy into that whatsoever. There's enough money there. There's enough money to go into Iraq without asking us, and we went into Libya without asking us. There's enough money, to bring these troops home, rather than saying, well, we have to fund these wars. That's just an excuse. But to, I think, state my case that it's not un-American and against the troops to not vote for these fundings, because I don't vote for them, is that my top three groups of people by category of employment on my report that was just sent in, the top group was the Air Force, U.S. Air Force employees, U.S. Army, and U.S. Navy. They were the top three. I got more money from the military than all the other Republican candidates put together, twice as much, matter of fact. So that tells me that the military is sick and tired of this. Just talk to them. Just talk to them on fourth or fifth trip. Some of these young people got into the Guard units because they thought, well, guards and reserves are in a case of emergency. They didn't know they were going to go back and forth and see their buddies getting killed and wounded and disrupt their lives. So this involves a lot of people. So the military, very unsupportive of what's happening over there. And I am very pleased that I get the support from the military.
Could you talk a little bit about your criticism of the president's approach to ending the war in Iraq?
In Iran?
In Iraq.
In Iraq. Well, to me, there's some Republicans that are rather hypocritical because they say, don't leave. We need more troops in there because they know it's very unstable. Mm-hmm. But, in the defense of Obama, what he's saying is, I'm just doing what George Bush said we was going to. He made the promise to come home at the end of the year. But I think it's token. The embassy, which is almost as big as the Vatican, is going to have like 70,000 people employed there. But they won't be military. They're going to be contractors. And we're going to have our military bases around there. I think there's no chance that we're going to leave. It's going to be a drone base, and we're going to be around there if something happens where they need troops. They're going to come in. But I think we should be out a clean break, just come all the way out. I think it's a total failure because we've created a new government there. As bad as the other one is now, we've created a government that will be a close ally of the Iranians. They're Shiites and they get along with the Iranians much more so. There's border wars going on up in northern Iraq. The Kurds are fighting for their independent state. So actually Turkey has crossed the borders and they're fighting up there. The Iranians are involved in that as well. We were supposedly have gone in there to go after the Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda was never there. That was a figment of their imagination just to generate war fever. And at the same time now, there's pretty good evidence that the Al-Qaeda is in Iraq now. Also, as bad as that country has been, for almost like 2,000 years, there has been a Christian community in Iraq, but there no longer is. There's a few left, but more than 50%, I believe, have left. The others sort of underground. So the results are so bad and so costly. So I don't believe we're really leaving. I think there's a little bit of political pandering there to pretend that we have downsized that war, but we're going to have a military presence there for a long time to come, until we're flat out broke or until we get a new president that believes in bringing the troops home.
One of the big issues is the changing of the guard from Western Europe to Asia. Tremendous changes taking place. We're seeing a real, what we would say, an escalation in militarization in the Asian continent. Could you address the issue of how you would address China, Southeast Asia, and what would be your foreign policies?
Yeah. Well, this is an economic consequence. Western Europe and the United States have embarked on the inflationism, living beyond our means, borrowing, the fiat currency standard, diminished jobs depending on borrowing from overseas. So literally, the economic power has shifted. It's the economic powers we should be concerned about. Even with my significant cuts in the military budget, getting it down to like $500 billion, it would be 5 times as much as China spends. So China is not about to arm themselves and invade America. But they are the economic power. They have $3 trillion in the bank. We owe $3 trillion. And their conditions are more receptive to capital investments than they are here, because our companies are leaving, they're going over there. So that can only be accomplished by changing our environment here for our businesses, having sound money and getting rid of this tax code and the regulatory system, and that's the only way you can get the jobs back. But we can't do that until we get this liquidation of all the mistakes, the malinvestment, and the debt. And then we have economic growth, and those jobs would come back again. But right now, it is a transfer of power. And one thing, because I talk about monetary policy, the Western, in the last 10 years or so, Western governments, especially in Europe, and I haven't been able to get the information on whether or not we've done it, but they sold their gold. They sold their gold when it's $300 and $400 and $500. Guess who was buying it? India and China and Japan. They buy gold because they know that's the ultimate wealth, and the ultimate destruction of wealth is depreciating paper currency. So the only way we can combat that is to look upon ourselves to improve our conditions, rather than saying, what we need to do is put on sanctions on China because they caused all our problems. That will, the sanction bill in Washington now passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. that is bad news. That's Holly Smoot all over again. That would be very damaging. And yet the sentiment is that way because people like to blame others. They don't want to look upon our mistakes. They want to blame somebody else. If we do that, it's punish China, for our mistakes, and that will be already. Brazil has put a 30% tariff on all Chinese products. So the trade wars are starting up. It'll be devastating if we participate in it.
Can you tell us a little bit about your position on immigration and what perhaps we're doing wrong in that arena?
The immigration problem, as I see it, is compounded because of our economic problems. Because in a good, healthy economy, there's usually a shortage of labor. And even in this weak economy, leading up to 2008, there was always a shortage of labor because a lot of Americans wouldn't take some of these jobs, in the construction industry. There just weren't Americans available to do it. So there was an incentive. There were jobs there, and a lot of people came over and got these jobs. We should have better immigration activity at the borders. We should have better work programs. Let people come in legally and work if this is what we need, that let people come and go back and forth. But we encourage the illegal immigration because we also give incentives for it. We have incentives here to diminish the enthusiasm for our people to work, but we give the incentives for people to come over here illegally because if an illegal alien comes over and they have a family, they can. They have services. They have medical services, educational services. In Texas, a lot of hospitals and schools are going bankrupt because of this burden of people coming in illegally. I don't think there should be any federal mandates on the states to provide free services. The 15 million or so illegals that are in this country, there's no way anybody's going to round them up and send them home. That's just, it's beyond it. But they should be identified. They should not get voting rights. They should not have an easy path to citizenship unless it's very, very long-term path to citizenship. But we should not reward illegal entry with easy road to citizenship or any entitlements. I do not believe it sort of fits the American spirit by building great barriers. They say, could a fence work? Doubtfully. But you could keep some illegals out. Some people like to build barbed wire fences and put machine guns down there, and that's not the way I think we should be. We should be improving our conditions where we have better immigration services, because we would need people to work. Even today, I get business people calling. Some of our people aren't well enough trained. They're not ambitious enough. They won't take some of these jobs, and there are jobs going begging because of our lack of training. For many of our people. So it is a difficult problem. There's a lot of demagoguing going on. But what I'm afraid is going to happen is our economy is going to get much worse, and if we move toward violence, people, just like I mentioned, they like to blame the Chinese for all our problem. Well, in this country, the immigrants, especially those who perceive to be illegal, may be the scapegoat and say, you caused all the problem. And I'm afraid there could be some violence break out over that.
What do you think the country could do to most reduce dependence on foreign oil? What would be your energy policy?
Just totally legalize the marketplace. Get rid of all these regulations. Turn the land over that has energy and oil, and if it's federal land, sell it or give them a good lease and let them go. We have so much energy in this country. Let the market set the pricing. We shouldn't give any subsidies to anybody. But tax credits are okay, but everybody should get an even tax credit, whether it's solar or wind or nuclear or anything. But everybody should get the same tax credit. But they shouldn't get any benefits. The market has to tell you the best price. And if for some reason overseas oil got tight and we weren't getting it, the price would go up. Sometimes it goes up quickly, and it's amazing how quickly consumers adjust. Sometimes we can, it's conceivable that all of us could drive about 50% of the time we drive right now. I mean, that means you reduce the consumption by 50%. So people react to pricing. And if the price goes up, they're going to have an alternative source, but I don't think the goal ought to be that we have 100% dependency on our own oil. Even though we could do that, I'd let it work its way out. Japan has no oil wells whatsoever, and they're not fighting and sending troops to the Middle East to guarantee their oil routes. And I don't think we have to do that. We don't need Department of Energy. We need a Department of Freedom. We need to release the marketplace, allow the pricing decide which energy is the cheapest and the best, and we would be relatively independent. But I don't think the goal should be that if we can still get oil cheaper from overseas, we should buy it. If it goes up, just make sure there's a freedom to develop an alternative. And right now, just look at what the market did to the prices of natural gas. It's been fantastic. Even with the inflation, just because they were able to do some drilling, so nobody knows what the fixed amount is, and nobody in Washington knows, and nobody outside of Washington knows, because it takes millions of people to make these decisions on supply and demand and taking risks and finding out which is the best alternative.
But do you think there's any appropriate role for the federal government to say that, whether it's government land or not, that piece of property or that offshore area shouldn't be drillable, whether it's the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge or
well, the closer you can get to private ownership, the better. And Texas came into the Union with no government ownership of land. We developed the whole of Texas, all the mineral wealth and the timber rights, without the federal government. And it wasn't chaotic. And mineral rights can be rather complicated, and they were developed by property rights. And you couldn't drill next door to my land and take my oil. I mean, it's very restricted by property rights. So the closer you can get to that principle, the better. So when you get into the federal lands, I think instead of the federal government owning a third of our country, I think the federal government should own very, very little, maybe some parks and things. But the states, the property should be sold off or returned to the states, and it should be allowed to be developed. And you have to follow a free market principle that you have no right to pollute your neighbor's property. Whatever you do, you better not damage anybody's property. I think that the federal government would have a minimum role other than protecting contract rights and making sure that property owners are making the decisions rather than bureaucrats.
John, do we have another reader question?
We have a question from one of our reporters back in the newsroom. We are a PolitiFact newspaper, fact-check the presidential candidates, and our reporter Jake Berry asks you, you've had some strong words.
A little bit louder.
Okay, I'm sorry. You've had some strong words for Rick Perry lately, in accusing him of supporting Hillary Clinton's health care plan and increasing taxes in Texas twofold. Those statements were ruled false by PolitiFact.com. Is there anything we were missing?
Well, they must not have gotten the letter that he wrote endorsing Hillary Care, and he was very sympathetic about it. But my taxes have gone up in Texas. They call them franchise taxes and not corporate taxes. But I don't think there's any doubt in the minds of people in Texas that our taxes have gone up, as well as our deficits. They claim we always balance our budget, but the most significant increase in our bond indebtedness has occurred under the Perry governorship.
Congressman, we're pretty much getting toward a close here. Is there anything that we didn't touch on, anything that you would like to leave us with?
Well, in general, I am such a strong proponent of the principles of liberty. I believe the answers can be found there rather than in government. The smaller the government, the more liberty the individuals have. As government grows, it cannot grow without undermining freedom of choice, and that means freedom of choice as the individuals on how they want to run their personal lives and their civil liberties, their religious liberties, and their educational liberties. At the same time, this whole concept is defended by the Constitution. It gives us economic liberty as well, but it also is a mandate for a foreign policy that's quite different than one where we want to be the policeman of the world telling everybody else how to live. We should reject the idea of using force to change people, and we should be open-minded to having tolerance of other people just because they might disagree with us. We should not be intolerant.
Thank you, Congressman. That brings to a close today's Telegraph editorial board meeting with Congressman Paul. I'd like to thank the Congressman for taking time out of his busy schedule to meet with us. I'd like to thank the students and staff at Nashua High School for making this possible. And I'd like to have everyone please check back with us on Monday at 11 o'clock when the Telegraph editorial board will be meeting with another presidential candidate, this time former Utah Governor John Huntsman. In the meantime, thank you and have a good day.